Good morning. Slowly, people coming in. So Priya says it's a nice bright morning in Pune. Oh, and mango blossoms. Tamil Nadu is not that far. Nature is a bit back here, I guess. But it's a beautiful morning too. It's like still a bit fresh in the mornings and at night. That's really lovely. Oh, and Tess is with us again.
Yeah, hi Julia.
Hi.
Buddy. I've missed the past couple of weeks. I've had some study-related workshops, but they've been really good with the recordings actually, because you still feel part of the group. And yeah, Freya's session was amazing. I'm re-listening to that actually, just to take it on board more.
Okay, good to hear. Welcome back. And Michael brought his little daughter so that she can learn just from the first moments of her life. Yeah, so for all that already arrived, we might maybe wait for 1 or 2 minutes more before we start. But unfortunately, Lakshmi is at a conference, at an interfaith conference, and she has a half-day workshop there. And the Wi-Fi isn't working. It was last night. It's not working today. So we hope that they can fix the problem during the next hours. But if not, we might have a session without her. Luckily, we know each other by now quite well as possible through Zoom, I guess. And yeah, so we're like 12, 13 people in total, 12. I'm sorry. So okay. Okay, so Manik is just about to enter. Just when I'm about to say welcome, people are coming, so we take 30 seconds more. So good morning, everybody. Welcome. Before I jump in, I would like to start with a moment of silence. Just Maybe you can focus on the connection between all of us, no matter where we are around the world. Also for those who are watching on YouTube. Okay, you can slowly come back. So, welcome. We have a wonderful young woman waiting to say hello to you all, which is Shrishtee. I will just say some words as we also just met. I will read some words about her. She is an explorer and researcher and a chronicler of stories, narrating alternative worldviews and challenging the status quo. She helps in coordinating the Vikap Sangam process in India that intends to weave systematic alternatives and networks for collaborations, cross-learning, and co-envisioning the futures. She's also a core team member of Global Tapestry of Alternatives, which is a process that is documenting radical alternative networks across the world and weaving strategic alliances amongst them. She is one of the founding members of the Rights of Rivers South Asia Alliance and is on the executive committee of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature. She loves birds and walking and writing and reading and discovering music. And I hope that she can herself tell us a bit more about herself so that it's less technical and we get a bit of a taste of who you are. Welcome, Shrishtee. I'm very happy you're here with us.
Hey, Julia.
Yeah.
Were you saying something? Sorry.
I was just wondering if you could just say a couple of sentences, things you want to add on, maybe also to introduce you.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's always difficult to introduce oneself while you have already been professionally introduced, and there's lots that I can say about myself personally. Well, I think there were a lot of conversations that Lakshmi and I, we have had a chance to discuss, and we also had a chance to meet in Auroville. And I think in that process, I discovered also what a wonderful group of people in Auroville there are who are doing some amazing work and thinking around things. And so I've been deeply inspired by it and also found so much resonance. And when I got to know about this program starting and seeding so many things that Lakshmi was talking about, I was super thrilled to be able to be in this space once, to just listen in of amazing people that might be part of these conversations. I see Lakshmi is in here. So hi, Lakshmi, if you're able to hear us.
Hi, everyone. A friend had a dongle that we figured out how to work. I'm here. I'm a bit scared to put the video on. Let me see. I don't know.
Okay. Nice that you're joining. Now we can even see you.
Hello. And Shrishtee, thank you for joining us. And I'm not interrupting, so go on.
No, that was a nice interruption. Okay, yeah, so there are lots of things that Julia said about me being involved in some networks and alternatives and all of that. And when Lakshmi asked me what I might like to speak on, I was a little confused because there were so many threads that I could have collectively explored with all of you. But then I thought that maybe something like rights of nature, which has been an emerging thing across the world, but especially in the context where we are placed right now, or especially where I am placed right now, it's an interesting exploration which will connect a lot with all of you. Also, what you're, as far as I gather, what you're exploring in this space. So yeah, so I have a few slides that I would like to share with all of you. It just makes my life much more easier. I hope you can see it, and it's full screen. Yeah.
We can all see it. May I just add one thing, which is that Tyson, who should have been here today, or for personal reasons couldn't come, but somehow there was, he accepted a calendar invite. So we're a bit confused. So just for us to be aware, he might show up, which would be great. And then we kind of have a conversation all together. But for now, we're with Shrishtee, and we'll focus on the rights of nature. I'm very happy to hear more.
Sure, I'm a big fan of Tyson's writing, so I would be very glad if he actually joins us. Really amazing. Yeah. Okay, so without much further ado, I would not like to speak more than 20-25 minutes so that we have enough time to discuss and reflect it all collectively. And if in case there's some confusion anybody has and clarification needed, just let me know and I'll stop at the same moment. So let's, this is more in relation to what's happening in India and the rest of South Asia, and why we are speaking about rights of nature or something in that context in this region. And it's not a new concept. It has in many ways been spoken about, but just to lay a bit of a background of why we are speaking about these things is that the current environmental laws and policy in India and also the rest of South Asia have largely been used as means to sanction environmental destruction rather than actually protecting it. And we know that the kind of ecological crisis we are going through right now with the latest IPCC report and how it is continuously being ignored, how it just becomes just a general thing that you have to deal with, but not really change anything, is actually asking us in many ways that we need to rethink our fundamental systems of economy, of politics, of social injustices. And it's also signaling a shift that is required from an extractive, colonial, and property-oriented mindset of most of our governance and bureaucracy systems to move towards a very different one. And it's in many ways rooted in the cosmologies and worldviews of the indigenous people and the other nature-dependent communities. So, for example, the Lepchas in the Northeast India would say that the river is sacred to them because it is after that they die, that it's the river that is the passage for them to reach the next life. And there are many other such reciprocal relational worldviews that a lot of communities articulate, which is where this idea of rights of nature situates itself. And importantly, as we know that we have seen these two pyramids of ego and nature, where much of our discourse has been dominated by the first figure, where the man is at the top, women somewhere below, and rest of the species much below. Whereas many of these worldviews are speaking to what the next figure shows, that we are just part of the larger interconnected web of life. And I would like to highlight some of the worldviews that have personally inspired me to be part of this discourse and where I find the resonance of it, and in many ways also being informed by it. So the first figure that you see of a beautiful river in the valley is the Zongu River in the northeast, which a lot of articulations of why they're protecting that river from further construction of dams, etc., and also building some transformative processes in the ground, articulating why we don't need dams for livelihoods, but a different sort of a relationship with the nature. And the other two is from the communities that have been involved in central India, the Gond Adivasis, the indigenous peoples here in India. And when they're articulating of why they're protecting their territories, their sense of connection is not just about humans, it's about the species, the trees, and everything living in that territory. And it's very sacred for them. And so the sense of what is a community, what is a society, is so much more beyond what you and I usually sense of community. And so for them, the destruction of their territories is not just destruction of their livelihoods, of their lands, but it is also of their own spiritual connections and their own kith and kin. And a lot of worldviews among communities articulate this vision. Now, what's happening across the world? So there are lots of interesting processes unfolding. There's one approach of earth-centered governance, which has not really emerged from, say, the indigenous worldviews and cosmologies, but a philosophical exploration of why we need to think about governance from an earth perspective. And a lot of people like Thomas Berry and others in the West have actually been exploring it. So a lot of emergence of thinking around this is through this approach. Then there's a constitutional approach. So the Ecuador so there was a lot of local civil disobedience happening in Ecuador before 2008, and finally their constitution was redrafted, and what they included in that was rights of nature as a constitutional amendment, which was a lot informed by their own indigenous communities' way of relating with the Mother Earth, but it had a legal recognition in the constitution. And then the third is the indigenous and relational approach, and we see a lot of cases coming about across the world, where actually the local indigenous communities and other nature-dependent communities have been coming out with statements, drafting local ordinances, arguing for rights of nature. The recent one is rights of the salmon fish in the rivers and its right to exist and persist, which was by the local community in the US. And then there's a judicial approach, which is what India adopted, and which is what a little bit we'll talk about, where the courts gave the judgments recognizing the rights of nature or rivers. So just a little bit of context of what really happened in India. What this actually opened doors was, first, that kind of a conversation around that the nature is living in the judicial discourse has never happened in the court of law. So the ecological jurisprudence in India doesn't speak in the language that was spoken in 2017 when the Uttarakhand High Court, one of the North Indian states in India, granted rights to river Ganga and Yamuna. And it recognized that the river has a right to exist, persist, maintain, and sustain and regenerate its vital ecosystems. And the same High Court in 2018 passed a judgment giving rights to the entire animal kingdom. And in March 2020, one of the lakes in the city of Chandigarh got rights as that of a living person. We'll get a little bit more into what does it really mean. Does it really move towards protecting these natural entities, or is just one those kinds of conservation or pro-environment policies that are usually passed by the court of laws? And there were, and why we want to also highlight some of the other judgments that happened in Bangladesh, where the rights of Turag River were recognized. And there are similar efforts being made in Nepal, Pakistan, about granting rights to Indus, and in Nepal granting rights to Mount Everest. Why this is important to look also in this context is not really a nation state subject. It is something that goes beyond nation state boundaries. So looking at the regional perspective of these rights again becomes an important approach to look at, which at the moment most of these judgments or the discourse is not looking at. Just to highlight a bit of what provisions in the Indian Constitution were adopted. So it was the directive principles that seek for a state to make attempts to protect environment, and also evoking fundamental duties as citizens of India to protect it. And I must highlight that it is, though this was a first judgment speaking in the context of recognizing the rest of nature as alive, it's not the first judgment that speaks of importance of preserving environment and natural ecosystems for their own intrinsic being. The very inspiring one was when in 2013, the court recognized that the Dongria Kons, one of the indigenous communities in Odisha, have a cultural, spiritual relationship with Niyam Raja, which was one of the sacred hills. And they said that must be recognized, as that cultural relationship must be recognized as something that we withhold and respect, and hence cannot be granted or sanctioned for mining purposes. Now, let's get a little bit into the sticky points of all of this. And I think that these are important to raise because this discourse is catching up and a lot is happening, but it's important to raise some fundamental questions around these things. And I'm sure many of you must be thinking about, what does it really mean to give rights to a river like that of a living person? And the first very big problem with this is that it's still an anthropocentric discourse. You are recognizing river as a person, and it's not really a person. So what does it really mean in terms of legal terms? It means that the injury can be recognized. The river has a right to sue in the court of law, and it can be sued. Now, this puts a whole lot of context into what happens when the river floods. So can somebody who's flooded by the river go to the court of law and sue the river Ganga, saying that you flooded me and must be paying compensation to me? So those kinds of sticky questions do emerge. Then it granted rights and liabilities like that of a living person. Now, what are the rights of a river? Now, you and I have fundamental rights of right to speech. What does it mean in the context of a river? A river doesn't speak. So would that mean that the river, if we want to try to define rights based on what a river is, so it could also potentially mean that the river has a right to flow without being hindered, without any impediment, without any dams being built on it. So again, what will be those rights? Who will define those rights, and who all will be included in those rights? Now, river, by the judgment that the Uttarakhand High Court passed, was considered a minor. Now, this has been a question that a lot of people raised here in India, especially because rivers are not just they're goddesses. They're so much more. They're so revered in India. So how can they be a minor? They're entities on their own. And so the court appointed state guardians. Now, there are two important issues with it. One is, of course, the river cannot be considered minor. It's so much more than that. And the second was that state that has actually been sanctioning all the destructive activities can automatically become a guardian for a river. And it did not mention the role of local communities at all. So that was one of the issues that were raised. It did not define violations. What is a violation to a river or to her rights? And in that case, what will be the compensation and restitution? Because that usually happens when say, suppose our rights are violated, we are compensated for it, and some restitution is provided. In that case, in this particular case, this did not happen. And a very fundamental question that is for all of us to actually look into is, what is a river? Even the communities, people, civil society groups have been working on river issues, have not really defined what is a river. And leave alone river, what are the ecosystems? And there's so much conversations around defining what is a forest. And there's nothing much that has happened in being able to define these entities. Now, of course, there are much broader concerns as well. What are the governance mechanisms, especially for rivers that are transboundary? Now, Ganga doesn't flow just in Uttarakhand; it flows through so many states, and also to Bangladesh. So how do we really implement these rights? Then there's a potential of a lot of misuse, because a lot of these pro-environment policies have been used as means to restrict the local communities and the dependent communities in being able to access these spaces. And we also know sometimes, and a lot is happening at the moment, where only technical fixes are offered as ways to ensure these rights. And in special context that we are situated here in India, that we know Ganga has been used as means of getting a lot of votes. It has been used as means of a lot of mobilization on political grounds. And so when the court just articulated connection with the river of one particular religious community, it limits the connection of so many other communities living along with the river. And then there has been no grassroots movement to actually articulate these rights or to take this to the court of law, unlike what happened in the other parts of the world, like Bangladesh or Bangladesh, because it's in South Asia, but also in many other parts of the world. Now, we did this kind of process where many people who have been working with communities, community members themselves and other activists who have been working on river issues came together to do this exercise of what is a river. And so what we broadly came up with, that the river is a civilization that includes, of course, the aquatic flora and fauna, the biodiversity in its catchment areas, its tributaries, its groundwater, rocks, soil, its beds and banks, and importantly, the human communities that are immediately dependent on them. And in that context, what becomes the rights of a river is the ecological causes and conditions that make up its natural habitat. And some beautiful thoughts, of course, came about of river having a right to flow, the soil and the underground water having its rights, and whatever determines the health. But a very beautiful articulation that came from one of our participants from the Northeast was that the river has a right to flow, to play, and to feed. Behna, khelna, and khilana. That is what beautifully captured what a river does, and what its rights could potentially be. Now, duties. Now, this is an important one. As I was saying, that will Ganga flooding its floodplains be considered the violation of rights of communities living along those floodplains? And with a lot of discussion, it came about it cannot be. And we see many examples in other parts of the world also of how duties have been defined. And the important aspect of it is that the duties will have to be defined, which is intrinsic to the entity that we are talking about. So it cannot be separate from what the identity of that entity is. I'm not sure if it's clearly coming out, but it has to be intrinsic to the river. We cannot define duties based on, say, what as humans we might define our own duties. And so the natural rights would have a corresponding natural duties. Now, implementation in the context where we are situated, I think it is important that we look at the implementation from a very different point of view. There's a much of broader point of view, which I'll briefly speak about, but the basic one is that we need a democratic system of custodianship. So the local communities have to be at the heart of deciding what happens to the rivers, and not just the state actors. Of course, state institutions and others must be involved, but we need a multi-nested institutional framework to be able to really ensure that the rights of the rivers are granted, and need to have more consultative processes of coming about of what these could mean. And it is, again, very, very important, which the court didn't do, but for us, it is important that we define the violation of the rights of rivers. So any obstruction or impediment that disables the river to perform its essential function, like the one that is happening in the banks of the river Ganga. This is the ambitious Modiji's plan of building a lot of it's crazy plan, but of course doing a lot of destruction to the rivers must be part of those violations. And for us as people who are involved in other movements and grounded movements with communities and others, we feel for any such discourse to really take off, it has to question the fundamentals of the roots of our crisis. So first is, of course, this fetishness to growth and development model, which sees nature as an impediment towards this progress idea. So we must question that. We cannot continue seeking for rights of rivers while also continuing with sanctioning destructive development projects. Which a lot we see in happening in other parts of the world, and also, of course, here in India. Then we have to question this authoritarian or a centralized political governance model, where the decision making, it's a regulatory failure, right? So the decision making happening is only in a few pockets where the local communities and others are not really involved in deciding what happens to their territory. So that has to be questioned. We have to question the legal framework. The current one that we have in India is quite is a lot inspired, and in fact a lot based on the colonial setup. And so that has to include, and if it has to really grant these rights, which are still limited in so many ways, it has to become a pluriversal legal framework, which is able to encompass also what are communities' own ways of defining laws and policies. And there are lots of examples of that. So we have to question this extractive, property-oriented legal framework, which is in many ways limited of how it sees also the rest of nature. And as somebody who's talking about rights of nature, is also aware of the fact that this is just a means towards the larger systemic transformations that we want to achieve. So it's just one of the approaches of many approaches that we have. So not seeing it as an end in itself, but a lot that needs to be done to be truly ensuring the rights of these entities. So what lies ahead of us? Lots of campaign awareness and advocacy. And importantly, I think for us, it is the decolonization of the idea itself, articulation of rights of rivers in what really communities articulate them as, not really what is coming from the West. And so that is why that articulation of what a river, the rights of rivers include to play, to feed, is an important articulation for us. And that's where the work is required. And of course, there's a lot of legal policy strategies that are unfolding that must be used. Then, of course, international laws that can be used as a contravention to legal rights of rivers could be used. The other aspect of it is that a lot of communities, I was saying earlier, have their own customary and traditional laws. And there has been a big gap between these laws and the formal laws. So a lot of work needs to be done of how do we bridge the gap between the two, and how they can speak to each other, and how it can be more encompassing of people's own traditional ways of being and relating to the rest of nature. And that's why we need a lot of work in educational, cultural, religious, and media spaces. We know, for example, that the Ganga Action Parivar has come out with a very ambitious Ganga National River Act, but it doesn't really question the other aspects, because it is asking for vegetarianism and other such stuff, but it is completely blind of the diverse ways communities relate with nature, and cannot be under any homogenized way of looking at our own relationship with nature. The other aspect is reimagining governance also from an ecological point of view, because the nature doesn't necessarily follow the human-made boundaries; it is contiguous. And so, how our own governance and sense of what a democratic community includes also becomes beyond humans, and we can actually truly imagine governance from an ecological or a bioregional perspective. And a lot of young people usually ask that question of what can we do to do wherever we are. We're not really in some remote area where we protect. I'm in Mumbai and I can't really do anything for rivers. And there is a lot that you can do for rivers, because there are 5 rivers in Mumbai. You must do something about them. And I live in Pune city, and Pune has 5 rivers, and all of their water comes from other parts, because Pune has destroyed all their rivers. So it is important that we be involved in any local processes of lake revival and river protection wherever we are. It needs support, and it's just not lake revival or river protection or whatever entity that needs our help and protection. So yeah, just wherever you are, if you're in South Asia, this is a group that you can be connected with. If you are in other parts of the world and still interested, you can be connected to Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature and the Earth Law Center that are doing some amazing work. And if you're interested, you can also collaborate with them. Yeah, thank you. I hope I was not too much beyond time. And
No, you
Thank you.
finished early. No, it's a bit more
22
than
minutes, Shrishtee, you're good.
22 minutes. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll hand over to Lakshmi as she's here and with us.
Thank you, Shrishtee. Thanks for that. I felt like I was taken into a different world altogether, really. And I actually the amount of work that has been gone into thinking about all the different aspects of this, that it's also about governance, it's also about relationship to nature, and the on the ground work in consultation with indigenous communities that has gone into informing the rights of rivers. I think that is quite amazing. How long did it take?
Well, I think it's many years of work, and it's just I'm sharing it, but I don't think it's just my work. It's a lot of people who have worked for all these years, and but these consultations have really begun after the Uttarakhand High Court judgment in context of, say, the rights of rivers. So 3.5 years. Of course, COVID severely impacted many of our work, but yeah.
Thank you. So I'll open the floor up for questions and comments and feedback, whatever. So all you show, you can put your hand up. And Michael, I can see your hand's gone up.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much. It was a really presentation and so rich. I really just started because it's just the top of my head because you just finished with this. A really simple question. I have the feeling that many things change actually since COVID, and in the context where you're working at, and like maybe not necessarily the recognition of rights for nature and for its elements, but at least an openness or the fact that COVID really slowed down a lot of development, a lot of activities. Have you seen any sort of maybe light at the end of the tunnel or any progress on this side thanks to COVID?
Well, it has been actually the opposite. COVID has been used as a time space where a lot of disruptive activities and a lot of amendments to important existing laws and policies, which were in many ways good and progressive, but not seeking any fundamental transformations. But the government has given further proposals to dilute these laws and policies, like the Biodiversity Act, the Forest Rights Act, and many such progressive acts have been proposed for further dilution. So this time has actually been used to sanction many destructive projects and dilute whatever laws and policies people still have to make it even more easier for the destruction of these projects. So the light, I think, is the only the kind of resistance movement that emerged with in response to these dilutions. Like a lot of young people very vociferously protested against the environment impact assessment amendments that were proposed by the government, and so with the Biological Diversity Act. So I think that the hope is with a lot of resistance that has emerged in response to the dilution. Does that answer your question, Michael? Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, it does.
Deepak.
Hi, thanks for a great presentation. I was losing power, so I was listening on YouTube through my data, and I got most of it. It was interesting. So you mentioned Chhattisgarh, right? Like Gachiroli and Bastar. So, it took me back to the early days of Vinayak Sen campaign, and I was involved in some of that here in Bangalore. And a question that has been kind of remaining since you mentioned this kind of spiritual engagement, and looking at it as a kind of a separate thing from linking to rights for now, but thinking about it from a point of view of tribal sacredness or consciousness. What is your assessment of where these communities are, the ones that are embroiled, given the Nyamgiri kind of issue, post the court orders? Like, what is your kind of sense of how this percolates into the community itself? Like, how are they, because my critique of this has been that there is, the act with the kind of activist interventions, left liberal kind of folks who go into these spaces, that it gets kind of appropriated as just kind of to be instrumentalized in a kind of legal way or whatever. But the biggest problem in India has been this kind of duality between the legal, and consciousness, like, the idea of public consciousness. So I was just trying to see how is activism kind of working with these complexities, and also stepping back and seeing, can we give the community its space to, kind of re-embody this spirituality or the sacredness for themselves? Because we often, today has become really like easy. I mean, 10 years back when I said spirituality, people didn't want to talk about it. Especially the left liberal crowd was so averse to that. And they still are, but now it's okay because tribal, consciousness allows it. So, but it still hasn't kind of caught up the way indigenous communities across the world are mobilizing it deeply, in a more contemplative, reflective way. So I just wanted to get a sense of that. And so I leave it at that. I have another follow-up thing about rights itself, but maybe based on this, I can ask, or somebody else ask something. Thanks.
Thanks, Deepak. That's a wonderful question. So I will be answering while I'm also thinking about it. So if it's in any way incoherent, please excuse me. I think you're absolutely right. And we experience it a lot of times, and I think it in many ways is also my own limitation of how I've been trained in my education all through. That it has been a struggle to really truly understand what do people really mean when they're talking about protection of their sacred territories, and a lot of us struggle with that articulation, and especially a lot of NGOs and networks that are working locally, they still don't bring that articulation at the forefront. And that's why I think in many ways these articulations from the South Asia are never really have been getting a space in the global forums of what really communities mean when they're talking about their connection with the rest of nature. So those cosmologies and worldviews haven't found a space in local or international platforms. We don't have the language yet. One is, of course, our own limitations, and the other is the diversity and plurality. And it has been very difficult to differentiate, say, how Adivasis would define their relationship with the forest or with a mountain, to what maybe other local communities who might identify themselves as Hindus would define their relationship. So it's also the diversity and plurality of our own traditions, and how difficult it is to actually differentiate these things. And maybe it's not right to differentiate, because all of them have been informed by each other. And while we are dealing with these complexities on the ground, there's a lot that people have to anyway deal with. It's about their survival and sustenance. So I think that's where the struggle of a lot of activists and people like me, I would say, and others who have been dealing with these issues, who are very connected to this sense of exploring our own spiritual dimensions to our own activism and our work, but also find ourselves very limited to be able to fully understand and also be able to make these various differentiations that exist among the communities. As for the communities it goes, I mean, leave alone us, we are anyway outsiders. As for the communities it goes, they're very clear in their articulation. Sometimes it happens because of the kind of people they have to interact with, which is the army. Sometimes, especially in central India, there's a lot of CRPF. Then there's, of course, the bureaucracy. That these connections are sometimes easy to articulate, and sometimes they are not. But they are very strong in their work, and that's what I have learned through my engagement. That when the communities in central India, which is the region in Gadchiroli, especially, when they are saying that they are protecting this territory, it's in their articulation. They're not really seeing it as, oh well, this is a territory which has so much of iron ore, which could potentially be a big resource for us. Or saying that, we need these trees and these forests for our own sustenance and survival. That is one of the articulations, but it is for what I shared with you folks, and of Sumaru Kallo. The other thing that he says, which is so inspiring, is that we can be displaced. The government have asked us to leave these lands. We can go to Nagpur and live, but where will the spirits in the forest go? Where will the species in the forest go? And for me myself, it was quite a revelation of how it's not the concern about themselves. It is so much more broader. So it is very strong in their own articulation. But I think it in strategic ways, in activism, in advocacy, these things are put aside. And I think that is the struggle that we all are having at the moment, of how do we put them at the forefront, because they are very important, and also not in a way that we appropriate them, that we extract, we have that extractive relationship with them. How do we do it in a gentle way? And I don't think so I have a fuller answer of how successful all of us have been. But it's a constant struggle and a learning that we are still ourselves exploring. Sometimes I feel very scared of sharing these things. I feel sometimes, am I exposing the communities by speaking about it to people that I don't know also? But so I'm saying that while I'm doing it, I'm also quite questioning myself of my own relationship with them and how I'm doing it.
Thank you, Shrishtee. Thank you for your honesty. I really appreciate it. Tess, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So interesting, Shrishtee. Thank you. And I guess it's the benefit of sharing stories from different parts of the world as well. So I wanted to share a little bit about what I've been tracking in Australia. There's a group here called the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, and you're aware of them. And there's a lady called Michelle Maloney, who is an environmental lawyer. But what's interesting, like Deepak mentioned this tribal consciousness that resonated with me. And you mentioned the term cosmologies as well. And Michelle has paired up to really look at Indigenous thinking and perspectives to be integrated into what can be done in the legal system and in terms of advocacy. So there's an amazing woman called Mary Graham, who is an Aboriginal elder from Queensland. You're nodding, I think you're aware of her. She's just, divine, the way she articulates things. And I think for everyone here, following on from Freya Matthews' input about, how we can work with Indigenous people and perspectives and really integrate that approach from the grassroots and ground level up. So they do some great work. So they've got a really interesting website, which I'll put the link in. And there's this course you can do online from anywhere called Future Dreaming. And so there's a lot of Indigenous presenters. So they cover the legal aspects as well as the Indigenous. And drawing again from other examples elsewhere, like New Zealand, the Wanganui River, the first waterway to be granted legal personhood. And there's an amazing lady that I'd also like to mention, who is an Indigenous elder from Western Australia. And her name is Dr. Anne Polina, because she has multiple PhDs, and I think she's doing another one. And she's also known as the River Whisperer. And she's just an amazing woman, really grounded, and this beautiful, gentle wisdom that comes forth when she speaks. And it comes from a really deep place. So I think it's a really nice example of that collaboration and really bringing those grassroots communities in Australia through the Murray-Darling river system, which stretches from Queensland through New South Wales, Victoria to South Australia, where there's all sorts of issues when it finally reaches the sea down the bottom of Australia. So that's an example with all of the mass fish kills and the issues and water theft and whatnot. So Anne Polina is a representative and a guardian of the Fitzroy River system in Western Australia, where, you know, this colonisation, extraction, you know, mining, they want to go in and really, you know, milk the river system for this development process. But there's a gathering from a grassroots level which is putting forward these alternatives, if you like. And she's done some great videos which are available online. So again, it's this storytelling process and the sharing of ideas. So I'll leave it at that point.
Yeah, I've seen that movie, The Serpent's Tail, which all of it's an amazing movie and amazing work that they're doing. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And yeah, I've been in touch with all of them.
And for the group to know, I'm really trying to get Anne to come and speak. She's really busy. I'm in touch with her, but maybe someone from her group might be coming. So yeah, let's see.
Would be great.
Do we have time? Can I ask one more?
Yes.
Question? So I was just wondering, linking up these kind of ideas. When we talk of personhood, it's a kind of a legal abstraction, which I think the left discourse is comfortable with, so it allows it to emerge. What are the other forms, like, and they're very uncomfortable with, sacredness, which is another kind of abstraction. But it's instrumentalized in a certain way. Like if we can think of, stepping outside of a kind of having to link everything to a rights-based or a legal framework, because that in any way is a kind of is coming from a rationalist, point of view, and is linked to a kind of moment, which is the drafting of the Constitution. How else can one strategically think of mobilizing another abstraction which may not be pan-Indian, but can kind of bring in these diversities, look at larger blocks of ideas like, the Purusha, Prakriti, and all of these kind of, philosophical tags that one can link these worldviews to, without looking at them as kind of anti each other because of the caste hierarchies and other things that are in play. Is there some thinking, is there some work that's being done in this direction to kind of look at abstraction itself? Because if personhood is a kind of only abstraction that we can get to, and then there are a number of problems with that, what else can we bring into, in terms of politics, in terms of also philosophy and culture to really get law to, work with that, rather than us working with a legal framework which is already in place?
Yeah, there are two. I think there are two sets of responses to that. One is that considering the kind of situation we are in, and I don't know if you know of Ritvik Datta, famous environmental lawyer. And we were having a discussion about potentially taking this to Supreme Court and offering some solutions to the issues that sorry, I forgot to mention that the judgment currently is at the Supreme Court of India, because the Uttarakhand state government approached the court saying that this is crazy judgment, we cannot apply it. And so the Supreme Court put a stay, which offers the opportunity to, of course, go to the court of law with a newer petition and offering some solutions to the problems raised. And so in that line of thought, we thought we might go to the court and argue for some of these things. And we realized that the current scenario that we are living in, even arguing for something like this and even potentially giving some solutions for it, there is no acceptance to these thoughts. There's no space for it at all. Judges would find it crazy. They will say, and there have been some recent judgments where some lawyers, imaginative lawyers, have argued for giving rights to saying that, a dog is also an entity, an elephant is also a living entity, why not grant rights? And the courts have felt very angry about it, like, what are you saying? This is not possible. Are you really talking about giving rights just like you have? So in that way, the imagination, even in terms of these conventional tools that we have, is very, very limited, absolutely absent in that. So to say, it's absolutely absent. So in the current scenario, yes, legal personhood status is one of the tools that we have to go to the court of law. There are things like some other countries like Colombia have used biocultural rights, which is a mix of the rights of the rivers and also the living communities along them. But these mechanisms are very limited, which we also see across the world. There's a limitation to what the current legal system can do, and which is what you were also highlighting. But I think a lot of inspiration comes from the resistance. If we look at the resistance movement history in India, now when Manav Bachao, Jungle Bachao, Manav Bachao, which is Save the Forest, Save Humans movement began, it began from the communities in central India, where they said that we want to protect forests because it's not just a protection of forests, but it's also protection of humans. And it was a lot based on the cosmologies of local people. Now, what that resistance movement resulted into is having a Ministry of Environment that India did not have. Then it was the Narmada Bachao Andolan, where a lot of people were looking at of course, the people who were building the dam were looking at the river as, of course, a powerhouse. For people who were protesting against this, they still articulate that if the river, when the Narmada came into my house, all I could do was to pray to her. And that is a clash of worldviews, but it has resulted into amazing resistance movement. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is that I think the hope of really talking about these cosmologies in a way that they're able to be at the forefront, and they're able to be not instrumentalized, as you were saying, but to be truly used in a way that articulates these connections well and result into some fundamental transformations, either in legal space or policy space, is through people, through these resistance movements. As we have seen in the past, a lot of this resulted into Wildlife Act and other such important legislations that were passed. Forest Rights Act is a big example of that. It recognized the historical injustice that was done to people, to the Adivasi communities through the colonial laws, and it resulted into a massive transformation of laws and policies and granting rights or recognizing rights of local communities over their traditional territories. So, but in my sense, that could potentially be the way to actually truly do it. And that is not happening. I mean, young people like us are not taking up or not truly involved, not truly involved in grounding ourselves also in many of these philosophies and work.
Thank you.
Lakshmi, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Shrishtee. I was just saying we can take one more question, Shrishtee, because I told you till 10. Andreas has had his hand up in a while, so that will be our last question for her. Yeah, Andreas.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Very interesting, everything to think about and reflect about this. It brings a lot of good input. So my question is related to the Uttarakhand High Court in 2017. So I remember, I think before 2017 in Arville Film Festival, there was some documentary about problems in Ganga River regarding mining, and it was very interesting. It was about some sadhus that were doing fasting in order to stop the mining and the environmental destruction. And it was also in the same in Uttarakhand. So I was wondering, after the Uttarakhand High Court declared the rights to Ganga and these other rivers, if these people, like concrete examples of how this has been useful to stop environmental destruction since then. I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, so thank you for your question. No, there aren't any examples. One clear reason was that a lot of people still don't know about these judgments that were passed by the court. Even within civil society, people who were working on river issues did not know that these judgments were passed. So one is that people did not have the awareness about these judgments. The second is this, that there was no civil society, as I was mentioning. There was no civil society action to enable any ground up action to inform these judgments. So they were very top down in their approach. So in general, the main arguments of the judgment also were not something that could have been applied as they were. So that's why the that's why the Uttarakhand government approached the Supreme Court for putting a stay on the order. And once the stay was on, it couldn't really have been used by people. And the fourth is that no destruction projects have been stopped. In fact, a lot of them have been sanctioned. And the recent one, the Char Dham Pariyojana, which is the 4-lane highway in the most sensitive ecoregions of the Himalayas, continue to progress, despite the chairman of the committee saying that it is very destructive, and he had to openly, Ravi Chopra had to openly resign from the committee, saying that that they're not listening to me, while all scientific evidences suggest that we shouldn't go ahead with with this project. So no, not much has on the ground happened to be able to truly impact, to have any impactful evidences for it.
Thank you so much for joining us at such short notice. I mean, I didn't even give her enough information. There was all messages, and knowing that you were in Ladakh, and so really appreciate it. And I'm happy that you joined us and we could listen to you today. And it's also really interesting because we had Freya and Vasant talk about conservation and difficulties with that. And Freya talked about indigenous epistemologies, and you're talking about it from a very practical someday perspective as well. So they're just different dimensions to the same issue in a way. So lots for us to chew on, I think, at the forum. So we're going to continue discussions now. So you're most welcome to leave and get on with your day. You're there for field work, aren't you?
I am, yeah. Well, it was really nice talking and speaking to all of you. Very, very nice audience. I enjoyed all the questions. And thanks for having me. Thanks, Lakshmi.
Thank
Bye.
you, Shrishtee. Thank you. Bye. So, Lakshmi, can you stop the recording of YouTube, the YouTube channel?